welcome to some post-apocalyptic book recommendations. These are some of the varied post-apocalyptic books that I have read and enjoyed, so I thought I'd share them in a video. I would like to kick it off with Book of the Unnamed Midwife, which is a sickness wiped out humanity kind of post-apocalyptic story rather than a zombie outbreak took over kind of story. This sickness that wiped out humanity also left very minimal survivors, and those that did barely survive also have very low rates of being successful at childbirth, so most infants are born without hope. Our protagonist, though, is obviously a midwife, and she dresses as a man to disguise herself and also survive in this horrific new world. She changes names a lot, so you don't really know her, but you get to see inside her journal entries and from a third-person point of view of how she's surviving, who she's interacting with, who she meets, and what she puts into action. While it is a dark and gritty book that doesn't shy away from gruesome things, it is also very centered by human connection and hope, and it's very empathetic, human, and grounded as well, which is one of the reasons that I liked it, because there's so much threat usually in this genre, so it was nice to see some characters come abreast of that. Speaking of, it could have very much villainized religion, and I was really worried that it might, but was pleasantly surprised when it didn't. Like I said, a lot of post-apocalyptic can be bleak for very obvious reasons given the subject matter that it's talking about, but I really liked that this one kind of went there, but it also had a center of hope to it, which is why I've gone back and reread it, and it's one of my favorite post-apocalyptic stories of all time. It's fantastic on audiobook as well, so if you want to read it or listen to the audiobook, I would highly recommend both. Then we've got a book that has a film of the same name, but try and divorce the two in your brain, because the film very much just takes the name and then has the zombie outbreak just occur, whereas the book is something entirely different. And like I listened to the audiobook of Book of the Unnamed Midwife, I would recommend listening to this one on audiobook too, and I'll explain why. And it is World War Z. And this follows a set of first-hand experiences of fear and horror and the spirit of resistance of the first zombie war called World War Z. This catalogues the human response to a zombie outbreak occurring globally, and psychologically it was so intense to see so many crossover moments between how people are reacting and thinking in this book compared to how people reacted in real life to the COVID pandemic. I feel like this author just looked into the future of how the human psyche would interact with a global scale event like this, and he just got everything so right. And I mentioned that the audiobook really elevated this experience because when I was reading it, I felt not as connected to it, and that's because it's built like a short story collection in the sense that it follows obviously different first-hand experiences across the whole globe. And because the audiobook had different narration and style of these different sections, it felt a lot more visceral to me to listen to the literal voices of these survivors and how they interacted with or tried to survive this turn of events on a global scale. Now, the film chronicles this outbreak directly as it is happening, but the book really captures the leading into, during, and after, so you get a whole perspective on how this has impacted the world. And I found that scope really intriguing, and the characters that you hear from are also so varied. I really liked it a lot as a chronicle, and when I finished reading it, I was surprised that it was a fiction and it wasn't real, because I was like, I feel like this could have already happened, which is an eerie thing for a post-apocalyptic book to achieve. Now, the next one I want to talk about is very unlike World War Z, and it's called The Passage by Justin Cronin. This is a zombie/vampire outbreak that impacts humanity and changes it into a post-apocalyptic world. It created what could be called a predator versus prey landscape, where the remaining humans after this massive outbreak are trying to survive in very localized encampments, and they're not doing very well because the predators in this world are intense. We see present day in this post-apocalyptic world, and then we also see flashbacks to how that became a thing through the perspective of Amy, who is a 6-year-old girl, and she is a product of failed experiments that assisted with triggering this apocalypse. We also follow a character named Brad Wolgast, and he is very much haunted by what he's done in the past, but I think he's either looking for Amy or he teams up with her. I actually can't remember because I read this a while ago, but because it was so unique, it felt almost like a fantasy book, but also if Stephen King wrote a suspense thriller, if you put both together and then spat out a post-apocalyptic book, The Passage is what you would get. Having the then versus now dynamic with the narrative gives depth to the survival of the characters characters for how they are fighting back against what is lurking for them in the dark, which is very terrifying. I would probably call this an epic post-apocalyptic book just because of the way that it has built this huge scope of a world that now exists because civilization as we know it has crumbled. It really takes it to a new level and has really elevated this into a territory that captures almost sci-fi and fantasy in the space of human civilizations trying to survive. Basically, if you want a detailed unfolding undertaking of a corrupt government falling to a post-apocalyptic world, this is definitely the book that I would recommend to you. And then lastly, I want to talk about Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. My recommendation would be just to treat this as a standalone because it functions as a whole story, and just completely ignore Parable of the Talents, which is supposed to be the sequel. Personally, for me, I found that sequel very disappointing, but this book was a new favorite, which is why I just want to recommend this. Unlike the other two that I just spoke about, this is not a vampire or zombie post-apocalyptic story. This is a story where humanity was warped by drugs and consumerism, and as a result has descended into madness and anarchy, and the people who are left over are just trying to survive to the best they can when resources like water are scarce. Lauren Alamina, which is our protagonist, lives in an encampment behind defensible walls with her family and their community. And her father, who is a preacher, is trying to lead people down a hopeful and righteous path. But Lauren doesn't necessarily follow everything that her father is talking about, and she actually may have a revolutionary idea that is potentially the hope to save humanity. She also struggles with what is called hyperempathy, and it's an affliction that affects a small percentage of people in this new civilization because of the effect of drugs on this society. She is extraordinarily hypersensitive to the pain of others, to the point that if she sees somebody's injury, she feels it as if it has happened to her. So if she sees someone with a broken leg, she will be unable to move and in absolute agony because she feels like she also has a broken leg. It's kind of like a X-Men ability, but one that you wouldn't want because it would mean it constantly incapacitates you. Now, this story about drugs, disease, war, water shortage, and the destruction of humanity hits really close to home because this was written a while ago. And therefore, the futuristic year that this is set in is 2024, which is pretty scary to me. This is fine and not at all realistic. And I think because this book has such true to form events that could potentially be in our near future, and because it's got characters that are so intellectual and driven, it's easy to relate to in that way, depending on how existential and doom and gloom you want to be. But in all seriousness, I really want more people to read this because it was absolutely incredible and it's a new favorite book of mine. So go and pick it up if you can. But that brings me to the end of this post-apocalyptic recommendations video. Let me know all of your recommendations below because I'm always after more and I find it really hard to find new ones that I really enjoy. So thank you so much for your comment in advance. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.